There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. It's time for Friday Reads. I have bailed on one this week. It was the audiobook I started last week. I'm not having luck with contemporary fiction on audio, people. That Kind of Mother by Rumaan Alam was no good. It was a really great opening chapter. I think I mentioned last week. The main character had a baby and it was described in fascinating detail. I mean, it was gripping. I have never read such a extended scene about what it's like to give birth. It was masterfully done. Then I continued to listen to the first quarter of the novel, and absolutely nothing else of interest happened after she brought the baby home. She wasn't very interested in being a mother, and I think it was set in Britain. I'm not really sure, but her husband was British, and she hired a black maid that she'd met at the hospital, tried to befriend her. But the characters were so uninteresting, and I got that far into it, and I thought, nothing has grabbed me since the kid popped out. Her husband barely showed up in the novel. She didn't seem very happy, but her unhappiness was really uninteresting. Nothing. It was just nothing. So I gave up. I have finished 2 short books this week. I finished the collection by Nina Legere, and this is a part of an ongoing discussion between Dan of the Weird Book Club and I. So you will have to wait for our final video. And just about an hour or 2 ago, I finished Heinrich Boll's The Train Was on Time. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It was more like 4.5. It's one of the few times where I finished a book and didn't immediately know what I was going to give it. And so I sat with it until about 20 minutes ago and gave it 5 stars. 4.5 stars rounded up rather than rounded down. And I'm going to continue to sit with that, and I may adjust it down to a 4. I loved so much of it, and what bothered me, I'm thinking at this early stage, didn't detract enough to not give it the full 5 out of 5. A really powerful story about a young German soldier. He's on his way to the Eastern Front, and he just knows in his body and soul that he is going to die when he gets on that train, that he's never going to come home again. This is translated from the German by Anna Funder, and it's a beautiful translation. I love the writing, and it's a really rich, nuanced psychological portrait of this young man. He's 24, I think, and all of the things that he's praying about, remembering, dreading, and various experiences that he has had or heard about. He befriends a couple other soldiers on the long train ride to the front, and the things that they share with each other, it's just poetically powerful, and there were parts of it that I thought were extremely moving. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but he does end up in a brothel and has a heart-to-heart talk with a Polish prostitute, and there was a part of that didn't quite work for me. It was a little bit too sentimental. And so I was a little bit shaken at the end, even though the actual ending, which happens in the last paragraph on the last page, which I'm not going to talk about, was powerful. Leading up to that, some aspects of that relationship I thought was a little bit overdone, and it kind of pulled me out. So I'm going to still be sitting with that, because otherwise it just was stunning. I really recommend it, and I want to read more by Heinrich Boll. And maybe eventually I'll learn how to pronounce his surname. Those are what I finished. I have started... Didn't I vow I wasn't going to start anything? I did replace the audiobook, and I almost gave up on audiobooks, but I remembered that I had wanted to read Pat Conroy's first book. It's a memoir called The Water is Wide. I think it was published around 1970, and it's about his experience of teaching on an island off the coast of one of the Carolinas, I believe, and teaching at an all-black school and getting fired. And I heard about it when I did another of his books on audio. It was the Pat Conroy cookbook, I believe, and I've always kind of remembered that, and I'm enjoying it. I'm not in love with the audio narration. It's not him that does it. But the story is really compelling. He's just gotten the job. It's a tiny little island. In its heyday, the economy of the island was booming because of the shrimping, and then that all died out, and so it's kind of a ghost of its former self. Not much going on there, and these poor African American kids on this island are kind of lost. So I'm going to be watching to make sure it doesn't get too paternalistic, but so far it's just interesting. And I'll pause here to briefly mention two things going on. One that's up for me here in Tokyo, and couple things that are up for me back home in Canada. The coronavirus situation is just spiraling out of control all over the world, and Japan included. I'm not personally worried yet. I don't have that kind of a worrywart personality, but Japan has kind of been shaken by some fairly dramatic developments. Last night, the Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, announced that public school, grades 1 through 12, would be shut down for a month, which is just like a huge shock to the nation. Can you imagine in whatever country you live in if that announcement was made with 24 hours notice? And a lot of the big tourist sites are being shut down. Tokyo Disneyland is shutting down for a month just to contain the spread of the virus. And probably, now I hate the Olympics, so I am hoping, I don't want anybody else to get sick, but I'm hoping it's going to lead to the Tokyo Olympics getting canceled, because I'm just dreading that. Every time the Olympics comes to a city where I live, I leave, but I haven't managed to figure out a way to get out of Tokyo to avoid the Olympics, so I hope to avoid them that way. But, it's hitting pretty close to home, and not only Japan. And then back home, Indigenous Canadians have been protesting about a natural gas pipeline going through a Native Indian territory in Canada that was never part of Canada. I mean, it's kind of existed in legal limbo, but really, the latest Supreme Court decision, I think it was 1997, I forget, 2007, said, yeah, it is a independent territory. It's never been ceded to Canada. There was never any treaty. It is sovereign. That's not the word the decision used, but that's the best word that's coming out of my head right now. And there's a natural gas pipeline, and I don't want to get into the weeds about it, but I've always been vaguely supportive of Indigenous rights anywhere in the world, but in Canada. But when it comes to land claims and stuff, I've always just been... I have never engaged with that, and that's the issue that has spurred protests which have shut down the rail lines across Canada for about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. And I'm having a bit of an awakening. That's all I'm going to say, because this channel is not about politics, and I am not going to debate anybody about these issues in the comment section, but I support the protest movement, the blockade that is in support of the Wet'suwet'en peoples in British Columbia, 110%. And I had a book on Scribd by an Indigenous Canadian author that I had bookmarked a long time ago, and I finally picked it up this week to read it, and then found out that there was a paper copy on Amazon for like $3, so it just came in the mail yesterday. My Conversations with Canadians by Lee Maracle. She is an Indigenous writer. I don't know much about her. She's written, I believe, poetry, short stories, and some nonfiction, and this is kind of a collection of essays about her encounters with white settler Canadians, and boy, it's just been a real awakening for me, having lived out of the country for more than 10 years now. Canada is in danger of losing its quote-unquote, good reputation as polite, socially conscious people. Canada really sucks in so many ways, and that's been healthy for me to acknowledge and explore. I want to do more of that through my reading, but I have really engaged with the voices of the Indigenous people that are protesting, wanting to shut down Canada because they don't listen, to get their attention, to enter the dialogue, to give them the respect and legal rights that they have been denied, never mind the genocide that we have perpetrated upon them for centuries. So yeah, I'm not very far into it. I'm not necessarily in love with the prose, but I am really appreciating her perspective on these issues. More on that later. The other issue is about climate change, and Canada is a villain when it comes to climate change, and we have a government that I have long supported that I have now kind of given up on supporting their compromise about climate change. We have to leave the oil in the ground because otherwise the planet will die because of us decades earlier than it will anyway. There was positive news on that front in Canada last week that the company that wanted to do the next tar sands mine in Alberta withdrew its application because of all of the environmental protests and Indigenous Canadian protests, and they said no. But really, they're kind of lying. The price of oil is so low that it wouldn't have been profitable. I think the oil economy will die a natural death, and we can move on and do other things that won't hasten the world's demise. Canada, wake up and smell the coffee. So that was good news. Okay, a little bit more political than I usually like to get. And like I say, I'm not going to argue with yous in the comment section. You can leave a comment, but I'm not going to engage other than to say thank you for your comment. If you disagree with me, that is. I mean, this is not what this channel's for, unless I decide that it is for a few minutes in a Friday Reads. Okay, moving on. So those are the two that I have started. I have a bunch of stuff going on in March, and I haven't finished very much that I've been reading in February. I love these kind of problems. In the coming week, I believe I will be starting 2 buddy reads. I'm reading another royal biography, starting a buddy read with Leah tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, I think. And this is about Olga Romanov, Russia's last Grand Duchess. She was the sister of Tsar Nicholas II, and she and her husband went into exile in Ontario, Canada, and became farmers. And this is her story, so I think it's going to be pretty interesting. And I bought this book last year, and then when Ange came to Tokyo, she saw it on the bookshelf, and she got a copy, and that was almost a year ago. And we are finally going to do our buddy read of The Deeper the Water, the Uglier the Fish by Katya Apakina. She's a Russian-American writer. This is not a translation. And the title is intriguing. I remember my page 112 test was successful, but I was still not sure, so I read, a couple more pages and was really quite hooked. It's about a teenage protagonist who finds her mother attempting suicide. That's how the novel opens, perhaps? I don't know. So yeah, I've heard really good things about it. I know Kendra Winchester interviewed the author on her podcast, Reading Women, which I didn't listen to because I wanted to read the book first. But yeah, I've been heard good things. And now that I've finished the Heinrich Böll novel, I am going to start The Radetzky March by Joseph Roth, probably within the next week, depending on what I finish. I have to finish at least a couple more books that I'm currently reading before I will allow myself to crack this one open, but I'm looking forward to getting to this for Read More German Books 2020, translated by Michael Hoffman. Joseph Roth was an Austrian writer, and this is his novel of 3 generations of a family during the Austro-Hungarian Empire and its collapse. It's been on my shelf for close to 10 years. I'm really looking forward to finally getting to it. That's what I got. So, happy times. Thanks for watching.